here we are, live, and It's Okay Not to Be Okay, Tuesday, April 27th edition. And so welcome back, and we can just I will let Caryn and Nikki introduce themselves if you would like to, and then I can kind of jump in with my questions I like to ask everyone, and then we can go from there. How does that sound? Cool.
Well, I can go. I'm Nikki, and I am a student at Portland State University, and I also work in the district, but I am studying social work right now, and so I'm interning with Miss Leuven this year to kind of follow what she's doing and be a part of everything that she has implemented at Barlow and learn from her. So thank you for allowing me to be with you.
Hi, my name is Caryn, excuse me, and I use she, her pronouns, and I, Miss Kim and I went to school together several years ago, so I have a master's in social work and used to work in schools and then worked in like as a therapist, and then I worked in crisis settings, and now I'm working for myself. So I've kind of been doing a lot of things. I'm really excited to be here with you today. And I think, yeah, we're going to talk about some stuff that I find really interesting. I'm open to questions. I'm open to start with the questions you have for me, and then I'll probably guide us in an optional little internal centering practice for those who want to.
Cool. Well, thanks. And yeah, I am excited for the centering practice. One of the things that I'm trying to do more of, those of you that haven't been to Barlow yet, this is the office that if you come to the counseling office and you need a quiet centering space, look for anything inside out related and you'll find me. And then we can go from there with anything that you need. But my first question for you is just how would you define the word resilience?
Yeah, I think of resilience as having the capacity to work through difficult things. And that doesn't mean you do it fast necessarily, but that you have that capacity that no matter what is going on, no matter how intense or overwhelming it feels, just that capacity to get through it and even the capacity to learn from it.
Cool, thanks. And then the other two questions, you can choose which you answer first. Is if you could have any superpower, what would it be? And if you need time to think about that, my alternative question is, what have you learned about yourself in the last year through all of the things we've experienced with the pandemic, world events, and just everything that 2020 gifted us with?
Ooh, such good questions. And I wonder if my answers are kind of related, because the superpower that I tend to think about is like being able to fly. And not just to get places faster, but like the experience of flying sounds really nice. It's kind of like calming, but very cool and kind of in control in the sky. And that sounds pretty fun to me. I think what 2020, or the last over a year, I guess. Sorry, can you say the question one more time?
Yeah. So thinking of 2020 or just like the last year, what have you learned about yourself through all that we've been through?
Yeah. So I learned I'm a really social person and I don't really love being by myself, but I've learned that it's really important for me to be by myself. And I wouldn't have chosen to be by myself this much, but I'm really glad that I can do it. And I think I learned that about myself in a way that I didn't know before.
Cool. Yeah, I myself have learned a lot about time alone and the positives and negatives of it. So isolation forces you to learn a lot of things, and it makes it hard to avoid a lot of things. So cool. Well, I'm excited to hear kind of what centering activity you have, and then just let you take the reins. So
great. And yeah, any questions? What was that?
I just said thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited myself too.
Yay, me too. Thanks for having me. So the centering practice will just be an invitation. So if you don't feel comfortable with any of it, you do not have to do it. It's something that I offer, but I'm also doing it for myself because I get so excited to talk sometimes and to be here that it's really helpful for me to tune in. So I'll go into it. And then we'll come back together in just a couple of minutes, and then we'll go from there. So my invitation to anyone who wants to is to first just like move your body in whatever way your body might need to move, getting some wiggles out, or maybe even making sounds like a sigh or anything that your body, your breath wants to do. Yeah, yawns are good. Just kind of allowing it. And then I like to close my eyes. I'll invite you to do that if it feels comfortable. You can also just look away from the screen where you don't have to worry what you look like or what we're doing, but just somewhere where you can focus on what's going on inside of you. And as you start to come inside, you can just start to notice that your body has been here, it's been breathing, it's been moving in all kinds of small and larger ways this whole time. And now we're just going to take a few moments to pay attention to it a little more intentionally. So notice how with your attention you can focus on your feet. Maybe they're on the floor, or maybe they're crisscrossed, or maybe they're somewhere else. But notice the difference between thinking about your feet and imagining your feet and actually feeling your feet. And see if you can notice what it feels like in your feet from the inside. And you might notice some tingling, or you might notice a temperature, or you might feel kind of numb or not really notice much. And just notice that. And as we're practicing noticing, you can also notice your breath. You don't have to change it or do anything differently. We're just coming into contact with ourselves, recognizing that we're here. Right now, you can feel whatever you're sitting on, or if you're touching anything, and bringing your attention into your belly. You might notice if you're holding it up or you're slouching over. That's all fine. Just notice. And see if you can notice if your breath gets all the way to your belly, if you allow it to. And maybe it's not so easy. Maybe it doesn't happen or it doesn't feel comfortable. That's fine. Just notice. And then we'll shift our attention into the top of our chest. See if you can notice if your breath reaches your chest. Here we might notice if we're feeling anything right now. Maybe feeling kind of open and interested, or maybe feeling kind of shut down or not so sure what we're feeling. Sometimes it's hard to know. So we'll just pay attention for another moment and another breath. And then finally we'll shift our attention into our heads. You might be someone who spends a lot of time in your head or aren't really sure, but we'll just notice what it's like inside of our heads, our minds. If there are any thoughts, maybe we're thinking about a lot of different things, feeling kind of antsy, planning for what's next. Or maybe you feel kind of still and just listening. Just notice. And take another breath or two. Acknowledge yourself for taking some time to tune in. We don't always do this. This is the first time I've done this today. And as we get ready to come back together, I invite you to just look around the room or the space that you're in and see what your eyes are drawn to. You might see colors around you. Your eyes might find something interesting. And then again, can move your body however feels good, and then come back. If you're looking at the screen, you can look at me, or if you want to just listen, that's fine too. Ooh. And we'll get going. I know I always find I can slow down, talk a little slower after that. I do want to invite any of you to put a message in the chat if you have a question or a thought, and I will either see it and respond, or Ms. Kim will let me know at some point, and I'll hopefully get to your questions. So welcome. Like I said, my name is Caryn, and I have been doing a lot of work right now with this system, this framework for self-understanding. It's called the Enneagram. Ennea means 9 and gram means figure. It's just a funny looking 9-sided figure. And I'm not going to get too much into it today, but there is this piece of it that I really love, and it's called the Centers of Intelligence. And I actually have a slide that I have, so if you like to look along, I will pull that up. And here we go. Let's see. Are people seeing my Senate? Yeah, cool. Thanks, Nikki. It's kind of slow for me. Oh, there we go. Great. So this is a concept called the Centers of Intelligence, and we just walked through them in the centering practice. So basically, I'll back up. So basically, lots of times when we think about being intelligent, we're going to think about how well we think, how much we learn, how much we understand, and how much knowledge we can hold in our heads. And that's super important. It's a really big part of how we can do well in school, how we can figure things out, plan ahead, all that good stuff. But we actually have 3 centers of intelligence, and we all have them. And I think it's really helpful to know what they are. And so if that kind of thinking intelligence maybe doesn't always feel like it's available, or it feels hard to reach, we might recognize that we have a lot of other ways that we're super intelligent and that our bodies are intelligent. So the first center is the body center, or the gut center. And the language that this intelligence uses to understand the world is physical sensations. So your body might feel cold, or it might feel like a rush of, if anyone's ever felt really overwhelmed and they get like a feeling in their body about it, or even if you just have to go to the bathroom or you're hungry, your body has all sorts of sensations. Your body also can be in touch with your gut instincts. If anyone has ever told you to trust your gut, there's actually a whole bunch of neurons in your gut that are communicating with you in this very like physical way. The body center is also set up to help us move around. You know, our brains tell our bodies to move, and also taking action. So anytime you think about something and then you do it, and you actually do things, you're using your body center. So we're using it all the time, right? But sometimes we'll use them really well and in a really wise way, and other times they aren't used quite so well. So I'll get to that in a bit. But that's the body center. Then we have our hearts. And I know it might sound kind of cheesy, but there actually are another cluster. There's another cluster of nerves and neurons in like the middle of your chest that acts like another tiny little brain, just like in your head and in your gut. And your heart center is responsible. It speaks the language of emotion, and it works really hard to keep you feeling connected and in relationship with people. And it helps us all have empathy for each other. So some people might, notice that they use their heart center a lot, while other people maybe aren't quite so intelligent in that way. And we all have kind of a different stacking of how we use these. And they're all valid, right? And then we do also have our head intelligence, and the language of our head and our mind is data and analysis and information. So we can analyze, we can plan, we can use our imaginations, we can pretend things are happening or imagine how they might happen. And it's also how, when we did our centering, we focused our attention using our heads. So we use our minds to decide where we were going to focus. And so the head center has really important functions as well. So I'm going to go through what it can look like when our body, when each of these centers is working really smoothly and is doing its job and it has everything it needs to act on the intelligence it has, and then what can happen when it's like not happy or not balanced. So I guess we're starting with not so balanced, right? So I think of things in terms of just being either constricted, like really tight, or expansive. And constricted could mean like we're like squeezing down, or it could also mean overactive. But either way, it's not flexible. It's kind of rigid. So when our body centers are constricted like that, and it's not something we necessarily are aware of until we start to tune in and notice, but it can feel really heavy or numb even, and indecisive or immobile. Like you might just feel like you just want to lay on the couch and not do anything, or you don't want to get out of bed. And there's like a heavy feeling, right? So that could be something going on with our body center. Or on the other side of things, it could be overactive. We could be like making plans and doing a whole bunch of things, and also deciding I want all of these things, and then making them happen and kind of forcing them, and maybe taking control and demanding a lot from ourselves or others. And that's also a way that our body center is not quite in balance. We're like doing a whole lot, but we're not necessarily checking in with, oh, well, do I need to control this situation, or is it out of my control? But when our body center is nice and expansive, we can feel really present right here in this moment, where we don't have to do anything and we don't have to be frozen either. We can just be here. We can feel really grounded and embodied. Like in the practice, we started, I don't know if anyone noticed a little bit of tingling when you brought your attention to different parts of your body. That's just like your body's alive. There's a lot going on inside, right? Even that you don't have to think about. You can feel powerful, like being fully in your body is like, yeah, I can do what I want to do and what I set out to do. And you learn how to use the appropriate amount of force. So maybe you really do need to work hard at something, but you can tell how hard you really need to work versus not trying very hard or like trying way too hard. The emotion that's associated with this center when it's getting out of balance is anger. And the definition that I love for anger, because sometimes we are told like anger is bad, or like don't get angry, or we might tell ourselves that. We might think it means we're going to be violent or we're going to hurt somebody. And that's just not true. Anger is a perfectly valid emotion. But the definition I like is to be being against what is. So if you ever say to yourself, I should be different than how I am, there's actually some anger with ourselves for not being a certain way. And anytime you think should, right? They should be doing it differently. This should be different. That should be different. You're kind of placing yourself against something that is some way. And you can see there's some judgment, right? Which is normal. We are all going to have a preference of how we want things to be. But we can tell, oh, maybe I'm a little annoyed, or maybe I'm upset with how things are. And there's some anger there. And so it's really helpful, I find, to just call it anger, and be like, oh, I'm angry. And then you can figure out what your anger might need. But often it has to do with trying to control or force something to happen, or even feeling totally incapable of doing stuff. And the core longing that this center of intelligence has is to be important and impactful. So this part of us knows that we're important somewhere deep down. And when we get out of touch with that, we start to feel kind of angry. Like, do I even matter? Do I even exist? Like, what do I do? and we want to have an impact. We want to do something that is important. Maybe we want to help people, or maybe we want to invent something or do something that's going to be useful in the world. And so I find if you're noticing any of these feelings, these constricted feelings, to slow down, pause, and just tell yourself, either in your head or out loud, or you can write it down, I am important and I am impactful. And sometimes I like to couple that with like a nice little hug or a little hand on my body, because remember, our bodies feel in the language of physical sensations. I think this one, we don't really talk about this very much, right? So I think it's pretty cool to start to recognize, like, oh, if I just like don't know what I want and don't want to do anything, I can remind myself, actually, I'm really important and I make a difference. I'm impactful. I don't know. Yeah, if questions come up, please feel free to write them down. I'm going to go through and then we'll do all three and then I'll open it up. But please feel free to type your questions. The next one's the heart center. And again, this can be constricted or it can be nice and open and balanced. When it's constricted, remember, this is dealing with our emotions. We might feel flat and just empty. And that I don't care feeling can be anywhere in our bodies, but in our heart, it's really painful, right? Because we're like, I don't care about people and like, what do I do, right? So it can feel really deflated, and it can also make you feel unreceptive. So like, it doesn't even matter if someone says they care about me. I can't even take that in because my heart center is not really up to doing that right now. Or on the flip side of that, we can be really reactive. We can be really touchy. We can be really have like big emotions kind of out of nowhere, it might seem like. Or we can feel really panicked. Like, how do I get someone to like me? How do I get back in good contact with somebody that I care about? And both of those are signs that our heart center is constricted in some way. The beauty of the heart center, the when it's expansive, is this is where we feel love, where we have this generosity of giving to other people freely without expecting anything in return. But we also feel connected. We have a sense that the world is beautiful, that there is joy and sweetness and kindness in the world. We might be really interested in the mysteries of life and feel open to exploring. And we might have patience and just be with whatever is. So this openness to life, where we can both give and receive. The core emotion associated with our heart center, and especially when it's not super open, is both grief and sadness. So maybe your heart is, your heart's responsible for processing all these emotions. And grief at losing someone or something. I mean, grief can be at losing the ability to go into school and see a friend in the way that you maybe wanted to, losing a pet, even just thinking about something that used to be that isn't anymore. And that can also bring up a lot of shame. And what shame is actually a response to grief, where we decide, well, if I'm so sad about this, maybe something's wrong with me. Maybe I should be different. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I can change, and then I won't feel this grief. And that becomes shame of like, maybe I'm bad. Maybe something's wrong with me. And that's all a sign that, your heart center might need some attention. So the core longing of this center is to be loved and to be connected, and even to feel like you belong. So if you start to notice you're like irritated at everything, or you're panicking about things, or you're like, someone says one thing and you want to scream at them, there might be some anger, so you might want to check in with your body, but there also might be some heart stuff going on, and you can kind of put your hands on your heart or give yourself a little hug and be like, I am loved and I am connected. Because these things are available to us all the time. It's just that we forget sometimes when they're kind of out of balance. So it's always a good reminder. And then our head center. So remember, this is what we're probably doing in school a lot of the time, is taking in information. And sometimes our head centers aren't really functioning at the way we want them to be, which makes total sense. There's a lot of things that we're processing all the time. And your head center can just feel really uninterested and inattentive. And it can also start to get worried and insecure, and start to kind of not want to do much. Or it can, again, go in the other direction and be really anxious, really worried. You can start not trusting other people. And sometimes we stop trusting ourselves, not trusting that we can make it through, not trusting we have resilience, not trusting we're smart enough, whatever it is. And then we can also start to get paranoid if we don't trust other people and be like, they want me to fail, that's why they're doing this. Or, oh, they're not a good person, and that's why, I feel this way. And so when you start, if you start noticing your thoughts are kind of like that, or like even just wanting so much information. I know some people, they like want all the details of all the things all the time. And it doesn't necessarily make us feel better, right? Because it's just our mind trying to get that information, but it could be a sign that we're constricted in that center. When our head centers are expansive, we just are still. There's some stillness there, and there's clarity, and you kind of feel really like you can feel imaginative, like there's plenty of space to imagine. Whereas if your brain is working on a problem all the time, or worried about something, you might not even be able to imagine that the future could be different. And your brain can also help you create a vision for what you want the future to be, even if it doesn't exist right now, even if it's not based in data, just kind of like possibilities. So the core emotion here is actually fear. And when we're afraid, we start wanting to gather a lot of information so that we don't have to be afraid. And the reality, if this last year or so has taught us anything, is that there's not a whole lot of certainty in the future, especially right now. And that's really scary. So it's normal to have some fear, but we just want to acknowledge it and be like, oh, right, I'm afraid because, if I don't do well on this assignment, maybe I'll fail my class, and then maybe I won't do this, and then maybe that, and then maybe that, and then maybe that. And suddenly we're totally in the future, we're totally afraid, and we probably aren't going to even be able to focus on our assignment. So we want to just notice that that's happening. And the core longing here, and the reminder that we can offer our minds and our brains, is that we are safe and secure. So even if just in this moment you're in a safe room, nobody's bothering you, or you have just a moment to yourself, and there's some security, like maybe you're going to come back next week, and your brain can latch onto that and know, oh, I can go talk to Miss Kim, and there's somebody there who's going to be able to talk about stuff with me. We might want to remind ourselves, and then again, I always like coupling it with kind of placing your hand somewhere that feels comforting on your body. Say, I am safe, I am secure. And that's the information I wanted to share. It's been pretty life-changing for me to realize that I'm not weird for having experiences that I don't understand, or that I don't even always have words for, because two of these three centers, their language that they speak isn't words, right? It's physical sensations and emotions. And while it's really cool when you find the word that matches, it's not always necessary. You can just be like, oh, my body's doing something, or like, oh, I'm feeling like I can't like swallow comfortably, or like whatever it is. You can just realize that you don't have to know everything with your brain, but your body and your heart and your mind are always trying to protect you. And they also might need a little bit of support and some reminders for the thing that they're set up to do. So that's what I wanted to share with you today.
I feel like, at least for me, I know I'm a person who likes to have systems, and it's kind of nice to have a system of a way to understand myself. And so it's really cool how you presented that. Maybe you shared this a little bit and I was connecting with the teacher, but could you give an example of kind of how you use this on a daily basis when maybe you're going through something stressful? Like you're at the grocery store for the first time after maybe being in quarantine for a month and somebody around you is kind of being stressful. How would you use these centers to work with that?
Totally. That's such a funny example because I'm noticing how much I don't like going to the grocery store, as I didn't go for a really long time. I already didn't like going, and then I didn't go for a very long time, and now I go sometimes. And what I notice, and so one of the ways you can check in about this is starting to recognize maybe there's one of the centers for you that you notice the most, and maybe there's one you notice the least. And maybe you notice one the least, but it also is really important to you. And for me, I used to never notice my body. Like I would straight up not go to the bathroom for like way too long because I just like wasn't paying attention to my body. Or if I did notice I kind of had to pee, I would just be like, no, my brain would like be like, veto, I'm not going to do it. And learning to pay attention to my body has been huge for me. So when I'm at the grocery store or around a lot of people, especially now when I haven't been around people very often, I start to notice that I actually get pretty overwhelmed. And like I said, I'm like a really social person. I grew up in a big family and I love having people around. What I'm noticing is that I love having the people I want to be around, not necessarily just any people. And being at the grocery store, you don't really get to choose, right? And so there's a lot sometimes going on around me. And so I try to just be aware of like, oh, there's a lot going on. And it makes sense if I'm feeling a little bit overstimulated. And I mean, I try to bring my attention into my belly if I can. And I'll maybe start to notice as I tune inwards, like, oh, maybe I'm kind of breathing really shallow or not breathing very much or like whatever's going on. And just bringing the attention back to myself instead of trying to pick up on everything around me. It can help me to just be like, what am I here to do? Like, oh, right, I need rice. Like, I'm going to focus on getting rice. And it can help. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you I do this every time, even though I know all this stuff. But that's one way that you could use it in the world.
That's cool. Yeah, I think of this in the sense of like, if I were to pretend that I was a high school student again, I would probably feel maybe similar to things I felt the first time I came back to school here after a year of quarantine, where, oh my goodness, there are so many people around me and it's a whole new physical space. And I mean, for me, it was also like, what is this whole work in an office thing with shoes on? And so I noticed myself kind of going into, I guess, my brain of like, okay, what do I need to do? Well, I write down a list, I do these tasks and I'm thinking, and then I get home and my body is just so exhausted. And as I'm listening, I'm wondering if that's kind of me not paying attention to my body during the day. And I would be curious how you could encourage people to pay more attention to their body during the school day if they're also experiencing that.
Totally. This is something that my doctor told me to do, and I was going to start today, but I had a funny schedule. But she told me to set my timer on my phone for like every 3 hours. And you could do it for every hour if you wanted to. And just when it goes off, just do a quick check-in. Like, am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Do I need to go to the bathroom? Do I need to just sit up differently or move at all? And just starting to get into the habit of asking those questions. You don't have to change anything right away. And in fact, if you try to change everything right away, if you're like, I'm going to take all this information and I'm never going to have like a constricted center ever again, that's going to be totally overwhelming. But to start by just reminding yourself to check in. And I like the external thing because even if I know in my head that's what I should do, having an alarm go off on my phone is going to alert my brain. I'm going to be like, what is that? And then I'm going to be like, all right, I set that to check in. So that's one way.
Yeah, it's a lot of that external. School has a lot more external things. Like even the bells, like I was talking with someone maybe in the fall, and they were like, I don't move around during the day because at least at school, a noise comes on, I get up, I walk, I might not be awake, but I walk down the hall to my next period. So it's like, it's kind of a built-in check-in opportunity. Um, I would be curious if you would be interested in sharing with us, like how did you decide to get interested in doing this as work rather than a hobby? I mean, I'm sure it's kind of a little bit of both, sure, but what let you take the dive into working in a passionate way versus like a different way?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm brand new at this. I quit my job like a few weeks ago, and and it's really something that I think had been brewing for a while. But I started realizing, even though I got to do a lot that I liked in my job before, and a lot changed with the pandemic, because I used to work with volunteers who wanted to help people who were calling a crisis line. Um, and where I work, there's also teens that helped teens who called or texted into a crisis line. And I really loved the people that I worked with, and I have personal experience of being in crisis and of working with people in crisis, and so it meant a lot to me. But I started realizing that even though the crisis work still is always going to have a place in my heart, what has been really deeply impactful for me is learning things like this, where I start to have language for things that I never knew about before, or I start to look back at what I went through in high school or as a younger person. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I can see these patterns and how I believed certain things about myself that weren't necessarily helpful. Um, and then to bring compassion to those things and be like, well, of course, like if my body was overwhelmed all the time, then of course I was going to be indecisive a lot. And like I maybe didn't make the decisions that I would have if I knew how to regulate my body in that way. And so I just started realizing, the more that I did the job that I was doing, that the conversations I loved having were a little bit deeper and they weren't quite appropriate for crisis work. And I decided after probably 3 years of learning about this particular system and being interested in it in a way that I was just more, when I went through grad school, they would say, oh, there's all these theories and, choose one or two that you really like. And I always liked some of them, but there was never one that clicked in for me that was like, yes, I want to use this one. And when I learned this system of the Enneagram, I was like, that's interesting. And then a year or two went by and I was still really, really interested in it. And then finally I was talking to somebody who works with it professionally, and they were like, well, it sounds like you've thought about going to this training in it. Like, what would it feel like if you did that? And I immediately was like, yes. Oh, I want to do that in this way that I don't always have that clarity. So I did. And then another year or so went by and I'm like, oh, okay. Everyone I talk to knows that I'm into this. People say it's really helpful. I can use it to help people, but I can also use it because that's where I'm interested. And when I'm interested, the people I'm talking to seem to get more out of it than just kind of walking through the steps.
That's cool. One thing that you shared when we talked kind of briefly about like how the Enneagram can be used and things like that was something around like everyone maybe might take the Enneagram test and have like a type that's their dominant type, but that's just kind of your natural instinct. And I really liked the way you talked about that. And especially as teenagers, like sometimes you have to be a certain way in the environment that you're in. Like maybe if you have a family that really likes spending all their time together and you're an introvert, it would be hard for you to be in that environment because you have different expectations. Or if you are around people that are really heart-centered and they always want to kind of be in that place, but you're more brain-centered, it might be tricky. What are some ways that we can kind of stretch our growth edge? Like, I know that I'm much more of a brain person, but my job is much more of a heart job. So I often have to, when someone comes to me feeling anxious or feeling overwhelmed, or to share maybe a really hard experience or a trauma even that they've experienced, my mind goes right to like, okay, what do we need to do to talk about this? But sometimes it's like people just need space to cry and not have anyone judge them, not have anyone say anything, or just not be alone. And that's something I've had to challenge myself in, of like, I don't need to talk through everything, even if that's what I would want. So how can we challenge ourselves to either grow or just notice that we're not all the same using this information?
Totally. Well, I think just recognizing that there are different people who need different things is number one. Like you said, I might want to talk it through, but someone else might just need me to be near them. And that recognition, I think a lot of times we're like, well, this works for me, so it probably works for everybody. And we have to be careful, because we really all do have different access to these intelligences. And like you were saying, if you're in a family who, like my family really like emphasize the head center. I think both of my parents probably use that center most often, and then school uses that center, and then that's what I thought being smart was. And I was told I was smart, so I was like, I better use my brain a lot. And then I was constantly like anxious about, and I didn't even have that word. I did not think I was anxious until looking back, being like, oh, every single time I had to turn in an assignment, I thought it wasn't good enough. And I thought, I wanted to do a really good job, but it was a lot of effort for me. And so recognizing that people have different, I'm grateful that I have had people around me who like emphasize certain things, but I also wish it would have been more balanced. And now I can be like, oh, all this heart stuff that I'm interested in, there are people who like really do that, and they navigate the world like that, and it's a valid way of being. That's super helpful. But they're also just knowing that you can build capacity in all of these ways, so you're not stuck. So it can be really, really helpful to know what's more natural, because when you're stressed, or when you have to do something quickly, or when something needs to be, you kind of just gotta get it done, you're probably going to do it in the way that's most natural for you, because you're efficient at it. And so how can we be grateful for and appreciative of oh, good job, to my heart. Like my heart just knows what other people expect of me. My heart just knows what other people need. Like, awesome, I'm gonna lean on that. But also when I have more time, and if I'm really thinking like, wow, I got through the week and I'm exhausted because I've been overusing one of these areas and not another, and that's actually really scary or really hard for me to go into a certain area, so I offered those kind of affirmations, which is one way of working with it. But say you think your body center needs some support because you're feeling either really lethargic or really hyperactive even, you can start doing intentional movement practices. So maybe you like yoga, but maybe you just want to dance in a way that you don't normally move your body. And every time you move differently than you normally move, like if every day you get up out of bed on the same side and you go brush your teeth and you go eat the same thing for breakfast, if you pause and notice, I don't want to do the same thing every day, it's not working super well. Today, I'm just gonna take 1 minute and I'm gonna move my body in ways that I don't normally move it, because then I get flexibility in my body in a different way. And that could be those small things, I'm just gonna move like this because I don't normally. And it could also be more practiced, maybe I do want to practice yoga every morning, or maybe I have a 2-pound weight that I'm gonna build my strength in my arms in this particular way. It's totally up to you. Or it could be even like you said with the bell, okay, the bell rings and I'm walking to class. While I walk, I'm just going to be really aware of each step and of how I'm holding my body. And I know for me, I have the tendency to slouch, but I also have the tendency to scrunch up my shoulders. So I'm both kind of relaxed and really tight in different ways. And when I bring attention, I just notice, oh, I can drop my shoulders a little, and I can also be a little straighter. and just walking with your attention there is powerful. So the number one thing I think that I would say in using this information is that you have the power to put your attention anywhere you want it. And so if you notice your attention is always going to the same thing, and just starting to notice that is a really great practice of like, when my mind's wandering, what is it wandering to? You can bring it to wherever you want. So I'm going to bring it back to my breath. I'm going to bring it to my body. I'm going to bring it actually to those thoughts and let me actually pay attention. I mean, even I find following my worst case scenario thoughts all the way through can be helpful instead of trying to shut them up. I'd be like, yeah, what if I did fail? What if everything did fall apart? And just letting being conscious of it, then I could be like, wow, yeah, that would be really hard. Like I would have to figure something out. But then we can ask more questions of like, who might be able to help me then? Or, we can go somewhere with it instead of it just going on a loop if we bring our attention to it.
Yeah, I find that I know in my own personal journey with anxiety, like someone told me it's kind of like a runaway train and it's going to go somewhere, or you can decide where it goes. And if you kind of redirect it to somewhere else, it might go a little more smoothly, or it might not, but then at least you feel in control of your mind and it doesn't feel like it's taken over. That was really helpful for me. Let's see, I had a question and I just lost it. And so as I'm thinking back to that, I'm curious if anybody here has any questions for Caryn that you'd like to either say or drop into the chat, and I can read them if you type them in the chat.
And if you don't have questions, I'd also be super curious if like what you're noticing as I'm sharing this, or if you've thought about any of this before, or if it's new.
I think I thought a lot about the heart part of it, because I think I'm definitely a very heart person. And so seeing how you said, like, how do I make this person like me? Or how do I, like, what do I need to do that? But then realizing, like, that they actually do love me and like me. And if they don't like me, then that's not my problem. But I think it's just, like, it can either be, like, I can put my mindset into a place with, like, realizing that I'm good enough to, and they do love me, or worrying about if they love me or whatever. So just, like, focusing on, or not worrying as much about it.
I love that. Yeah, and noticing, I think the main piece is just being like, of course my heart is going to worry about that sometimes. Like, that's its job. And how can I comfort it without telling it to, just shut up. Of course you're loved. And so I love that awareness of like, wow, sometimes that takes all my attention. And then sometimes when I catch it, I can remind myself.
I think I don't know if it was a question, but something I heard you say was just around, like, there's three things and there's not good, better, and best, or it's not a hierarchy ever. It's just we have three different experiences and each of them have a purpose and a time, and we all have them. And so something else I notice is, like, thinking of the last year, we've all experienced it, but we're all individual people. And so we've all experienced it very differently. And so I think as we come back to school and just move into the future, it's important to remember that while some people might have thought it through, other people felt their way through, and other people just existed through and are still trying to figure out what's going on. So just being aware that, and healing and recovery and moving forward it's not a linear process, and for better or worse, we can't control it. So you might be 6 months down the road and we're getting back to school in the fall, and all of a sudden you have some emotions pop up. And so I think just using the centers to give yourself permission to be how you are. I tell people a lot, you cannot control your feelings. I, of all people, wish that we could, but you can control what you do with them. And so what I heard you say was a lot around, like, noticing the centers and then choosing what you do when that comes up.
Yeah. And I think also acknowledging the gifts. Like, if you know your head center is like really just strong, you might assume everyone else's is, and that's normal. But really, you have this amazing gift that you can offer to people. And if your heart center is really like, you're really aware of how people are feeling, it can feel like a responsibility at times. You have to watch out. but it can also be this major gift. And I think often we downplay what we do naturally because we're like, well, that's not impressive. That's just, I don't even have to try for that. And to someone else, that's amazing. It's amazing that you don't even have to try and you know how people are feeling, or you know how to feel alive, right? Like some people really struggle with that. And other people are like, yeah, of course I'm important. Like, duh. And you can use that and bring it to your friends and be like, I just want you to know, like, it's so obvious to me that your feelings are valid, right?
A not necessarily related question, but a fun one. Do you have a favorite movie? And why is that your favorite movie?
I have a historically my favorite movie, which probably still is, and it's Newsies. It's a really old, it's Christian Bale when he was like a teenager probably, and it's about newsboys in New York in like early 1900s, and they like form a union and go on strike, and they're singing and dancing. I like musicals.
Cool. Yeah, we've spent several groups talking about just like different movies and their impact and how they're made and how their stories and the people that write them and make them are within those stories. So I was just curious.
Yeah. Well, Newsies, I learned a lot from Newsies. I remember I was probably in middle school when I saw it, and then I learned in class like a little while after about unions. And I know there's a lot going on right now, a lot of protests going on, a lot in Portland too, about like, and with COVID, how people still have to go to work and the conditions aren't always good. And when people come together and they decide, you know, we're gonna make things right, we're gonna protest, and we're gonna do those things. Like I actually learned a lot from this movie, and there's some historical accuracy and some of it is silly. So I like the combination. Because I wasn't ever that interested in history, but when people can tell the story in a good way, it's more interesting.
While anyone else is thinking of questions, a question we've asked a previous person who didn't live in Portland was, what is your favorite thing about where you live? Or what do you love about where you live? And that can be taken as far as like your physical space or the town or however you want to interpret that.
Well, I just moved from a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 people in it, and we were working very close together, to a house where there's a backyard and I have my own space, and I love it. I'm super happy with the backyard, especially I think. And there's even like a covered patio where you can like eat lunch outside even if it's not the nicest day. But I grew up in Seattle, so I really love the Northwest. It's just all the trees and parks. I like being able to bike to like a park or even walk to parks and just kind of like be close to nature, but also have all the food that I want that comes from the city.
Well, does anyone have questions in the chat that you're interested?
I was going to ask, if you could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go?
Oh. It's so funny. I'm not like the biggest travel person, which feels so weird because I feel like everyone's like, oh, I want to travel. But I'm thinking, I feel like I would like to go to Hawaii. That is a place that I've never been, but I love water that I could actually get into. It's not too cold. So maybe Hawaii.
Another question that came up, do you like Harry Potter?
You know, I feel very neutral about Harry Potter. I read all the books when they came out. I think I've seen all the movies. I really liked the books when they came out, but I feel like there are a lot of people who know all the trivia and all that, and I'm not one of them. but I would definitely be a Hufflepuff.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say well, not that you would be a I can't say it right, but I was curious with how there's the sorting hat. The Enneagram is kind of its own sorting hat in some sense. So
yeah, I think it's fun. I'm like not proud that I would be a Hufflepuff because part of me, I'm like, that's so boring, but I just, yeah, I know. I could just come across, it's just obvious. Like I'm very nice and whatever. My partner is like definitely a Gryffindor, and I'm just like, oh, thanks, Destiny. He's just like really confident and brave and also like really sweet and wants to do good. And I'm like, that's the hero of the story. But I'm working on, being the hero of my own story anyway, even if it's a little more low key. Thanks for that question, Destiny.
somehow, as you were talking about like being the hero of your own story, it made me think of Brene Brown. I imagine that you might be familiar with her work, but I've been listening to some of her podcasts, and she talks about something called Imposter Syndrome that I think many of us have experienced. And like, I wish I had had a word for that when I was a teenager. So I'm curious, how would you define imposter syndrome? And how would you use these centers or the Enneagram to kind of work through that?
Yeah, well, it's something I'm very familiar with. I think imposter syndrome is like, it's when you discount all the things that you know and that you've done to think that like, why should I be in the position that I'm in? There's no good reason for me to be here. I'm somehow fooled everybody into thinking I was capable of doing this, and I know deep down that I'm not. Fortunately, I feel like it comes and goes like in waves, but I think for me, like, because I've had my whole life basically like had a lot of people who say how much they believe in me, which I know is not how everyone has it. So I feel like lucky in some regards. But then there's that part of me that really just doubted it. I was like, well, everyone says that. How do you know? You don't know me. And looking at like these ways that we get out of balance, where it's just normal sometimes for us to not be really like clear and decisive or like open to new things or like able to try new things. I'm like, oh, maybe I'm just in a period of time where I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed or kind of like unclear, and I'll probably get out of that. And there are actual ways that I can work through it that aren't generic. And I think one of the hardest things for me was like when people say the same thing to you all the time, and they're like, you're gonna do great, or like you're so amazing, and I'm like, that's not specific enough for me. Like I need people, and I feel so glad now that I have people around me who do see me, and they're not just saying the same advice to everybody. And so knowing this system, I know where I stop believing in myself most often, and I can actually go to my one or two people who I know to go to and be like, hey, I'm feeling like I don't know what I'm doing, and this is like a bad decision. And they can tell me and remind me, remember how you've been wanting to do this for the last however many years. Like, this makes perfect sense. Of course, you're going to feel scared doing a new thing. Of course, it's going to be overwhelming for a little bit. And I know you specifically, and I know that you're totally capable because I've seen you do these things. That has been really helpful for me. Yeah, that reassurance is huge. And not just the cheerleading, but the real like, hey, I know you're in it right now. And I also truly believe that you're working your way through it and are going to come out to the other side.
Yeah, it can be really special to have those people you can call when you're like, I know this isn't true, but my brain is telling me that if I fail, the whole world ends, or that I'm going to fail. Because I found that when I'm right before a moment when I do something really cool, I feel like everything is about to collapse. And so there's definitely been, in the last year, there's definitely been times when it's hard to know what's happening because a lot of things change really quickly these days. And a lot of information changes really quickly. Like, we're going to school, we're not going to school. You can hang out, you can't hang out, different things. So finding those people is really key. And for those of you that are at Barlow, I know I don't know all of you very well, but if you ever need someone to be that person for you, and you just have a moment where you're like, I just got an A, but I feel like I'm going to fail every future test, stop by. I'm happy to help you. I also have Candy. Candy can sometimes be its own reassurance. But I know I'll be 33 next month, and I still call my mom sometimes. I'm like, Mom, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. I need you to just tell me it's all going to be fine. And so whether that's a parent, a friend, sometimes it can be your pet because they think you're the greatest thing in the world most days. So,
yeah, another piece I just wanted to share is that I'm 30, and I just learned that I probably have ADD, and that's something I never knew. And one thing that I learned about that was that I can be so in the present moment that it's like impossible for me to imagine. And remember, we talked about that brain center kind of being constricted in some way. It's like hard to even imagine anything other than what's happening right now. So when right now doesn't feel good, it's hard for me to imagine that the future can feel good. And it also is hard for me to even remember that the past ever felt good. And so having somebody, and I'm fortunate to live with somebody who will do this for me, to be like, hey, remember how you know that sometimes you get stuck in the present, and I want to remind you that last week you did something cool, and that you've done all these, like they can help remind me. Like, I have my grad school diploma on the wall now. I just hung it up, and it's like when I'm starting to be like, what am I doing? Why do I think I can do this? I'm like, oh yeah, I got through this really hard thing that not everybody can do. And I have to be reminded sometimes, because when my brain starts going, I'll just be like, but right now it feels terrible.
Yeah, there's a quote, I don't know who said it or if it's even attached to a person, of like, you've made it through every single one of your really hard days. And I think that's really important to remember, especially these days. Like, we've all made it through this pandemic. I mean, it's obviously still a thing that's around us, but we have made it through a winter. We made it through an Oregon winter in a time when we weren't supposed to, socialize in the same way that we might normally have. And especially being a teenager. Yeah.
And we made it through the fire,
yeah.
All of it.
Someone came to my office today to say, I think adults need to realize that, like, we are all teenagers, and like, you all can redo things. We can't redo our freshman year. We can't redo our senior year. And so this is harder for us. And we're not just saying that. And so to those of you that are teenagers here, like, yes, like, if you feel like it's harder for you than adults, I would agree with you. You can't redo teenage years. And so just know that you've made it. You've made it through. Whether you feel like you made it through how you wanted to or not, you did. And so whatever you did, at least once in the last year, you made a choice to push through.
And I think like there's something there with that heart intelligence that's so important, of just being open to however it is, and also to grieve however it is that you wish it could have been. Because so many people, like, I've seen this pandemic and beyond, not all the time, but at times, seeing it as this invitation to be like, okay, I don't get to control a lot of things. Things really aren't going to go the way I thought they were going to go. And I have this invitation here that, like, I know there's grief. Like, I can feel it in the air. Like, you can see it if you're ever on social media. You can see it in your friends and your families. And like, everyone's going to have to process that at some point. It doesn't just go away. And so if you give yourself a chance to slow down and do it now, as much as you can, some of it needs to be processed later. But just know, some people never slow down enough. And then it comes out sideways. Like, it doesn't go anywhere. It can come out in illness. It can come out in anger. It can come out in, destroying your relationships, unfortunately. But knowing, like, if you all know these things and you have people to talk through it with, like, this is amazing invitation. Do that as much as you can.
Yeah, I did not have, in high school, I did not have the words for these things. I was not even taught to really think about how I felt beyond just maybe my physical body. So, you learn things when you learn them. And I'm excited to help people have these tools now, because if anyone told you life gets easier, it maybe in some ways, but in a lot of ways you still have hard things. And so, yeah, in the interest of time, I'm curious if people wanted to learn more about this or get in touch with you, or get in touch with resources related to the work you do, how would they do that if they wanted to?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I didn't end up looking up too many resources, but people can email me if they want to just like share or like ask questions, and I will be happy to find some resources for you. There's a whole lot of information about the Enneagram on the internet, and I would just say be careful. It's not all going to be helpful. There are things you can do to like take a test and try to find your type. And the main thing I would say is just know, even if you like are like, yes, I'm definitely this type, you're so much more than a description of a thing. So just be aware if you end up looking into it, that that's not all of who you are. The way I work with the Enneagram is to say, you have a type, you are not a type. And your type is just what's running in the background to try to protect you. But I would, yeah, I will look into some resources. I would also say, I know a lot of people don't like to put types on teenagers until, you know, you're a bit older, because I know you all get to try stuff on and see what works well for you. And maybe you're really clear, like, I've always been this way and I'm always going to be this way. But it's never too late to build those muscles and you know, be well-rounded and as balanced as you can be, even if you have a natural way of being. But people are welcome to email me if they have questions or thoughts. I really appreciated being able to share. I agree. I wish somebody talked to me about this stuff a lot earlier on. So I'm happy that you're all here.
Yeah, I'll make sure to include your email in the Google Classroom for everybody that's interested in that.
Awesome.
And I'm going to stop the recording here in just a minute, but I'll stick around here for as long as anyone needs, if you have more questions, things like that.